Good morning and welcome to the Alabama Works webinar series, a monthly webinar designed to provide information and speakers related to the workforce in Alabama. Past webinars are available on the Alabama Works website at alabamaworks.com. And now your host, Tim McCartney, Chair of the Alabama Workforce Council.
Good morning. Welcome to the October 2021 Alabama Works monthly webinar. Our program today is going to give you an understanding of the wide-reaching scope of workforce development in our state. We're going to hear from speakers who connect learning across the entire workforce spectrum. We'll begin the presentation today with Hannah Putman from the National Council on Teacher Quality on the performance of Alabama students, the institutions, and on a teacher licensures test. We'll also hear today from Wilson Finch with the Council of the Adult and Experiential Learning on the partnership with Alabama and developing a crosswalk for the articulation values of prior learning experiences. Later, Mr. Josh Laney, who's the director of the Alabama Office of Apprenticeship, and Mike Malley and Stephanie Paul with the University of Alabama Education Policy Center will provide a demonstration of a new apprenticeship and in-demand occupations dashboard. Then Dr. Connie Hill, who is CEO of Girls Incorporated of Central Alabama, is going to join us to share some of the great work that she and her organization are doing in Alabama. Then we'll have, as usual, Mr. Nick Moore from the Governor's Office of Education and Workforce Transformation to join us for the monthly workforce update as well. So to start us off, Ms. Putman, will you please take it away?
Thank you so much. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, it is lovely to be here with all of you this morning. My name is Hannah Putman. I'm from the National Council on Teacher Quality. For those of you who are not familiar with NCTQ, we are a research and policy nonprofit driven by the mission that every child deserves access to effective teachers and every teacher deserves the opportunity to become effective. I'm going to share with you today the results of a project that's been more than 2 years in the making, looking at one of the key guardrails that helps aspiring teachers enter the workforce, the licensure tests that elementary teachers must pass on the knowledge of the subjects they'll be licensed to teach. As a bit of background, Alabama, like nearly every state, requires that all elementary teachers pass a test of their knowledge of the subjects they'll be expected to teach. So that would be science, social studies, math, English language arts, to make sure they have a firm grasp of those subjects. And looking at the data on the pass rates on these licensure tests gives us an important window into the quality of preparation aspiring teachers are receiving before they reach this point. And it also gives a better picture of the pipeline of the teacher workforce as a whole in the state. We've gathered data from Alabama and 40 other states and have published these dashboards over the summer. They are all publicly available. So what I'm going to do today is just give you a few kind of highlights of data from the state. And if you have any questions, I have my email address at the end, and I'm happy to discuss this with you further. So first, why licensure tests? Why do these matter? Why have a guardrail at all for entry into the profession? The field agrees that teachers can't teach what they don't know. Teachers need to have an understanding of the subject, and licensure tests are assessing whether or not teachers know that subject. People have found that it's really unfair to expect teachers to try to learn the content as they go to keep one step ahead of their students. So it's about helping make sure that students have an enriching education and helping make teachers' jobs easier. Also, licensure tests are not the only way to measure teachers' content knowledge, but they do offer some unique advantages over the alternatives in that they are scalable, efficient, comparable across different preparation programs and institutions, and they can assess a broad range of knowledge. It's also important to note there's a lot that goes into making an effective teacher beyond just their knowledge of the subject. So I certainly don't want to imply that licensure tests are the only measure that should matter, but they do offer some important insights. And where research has been done, it generally finds that teachers who do better on their licensure tests tend to be more effective in the classroom as well. So these are an important window into how effective somebody is going to be, whether they reach the classroom or when they reach the classroom. As a bit of context, Alabama requires the licensure test that is most commonly used by states. States can select what tests they want to use to make sure it reflects the content that their elementary teachers will be teaching in the classroom. And the one that Alabama uses is also used by about 20 other states. This test has some big strengths. It separately measures each core content area, which means you have to pass a standalone test of each subject: math, science, social studies, ELA. Alabama also requires that all teachers pass this test, all elementary teachers, before they earn a teaching license, which is great because we see some states that don't expect teachers to pass this test until after they've entered the classroom or give them alternatives. So making sure that every teacher meets this bar is really a strong policy. The one drawback, which Alabama has been moving in the right direction on, is the cut score, or the minimum score you have to earn on the test in order to pass, is actually slightly lower than what's recommended by the standard setting process. Alabama has raised the bar, and now I believe it is on par with the recommended score in ELA and math, but is a point or two below in the other subjects. So what are we going to look at? What does this data tell us? The data that we've collected here on licensure test pass rates has actually, for the most part, never been publicly available before. Many other professions publish pass rates tied to the institutions on common licensing exams, nursing exams, bar exams, accounting. Most professions publish this, but for the teacher preparation programs, the only data that's been available is through what's known as the Title II reporting requirements, and they have some big limitations. There's very little data actually contained in there. So what NCTQ has done is gathered far more detailed information, looking not just at how many people pass this test after they take it multiple times, but how many people pass it the first time they sit down. How many people struggle to pass and don't take it again? What do pass rates look like for candidates or for test takers of color? What does it look like for more selective institutions versus less selective institutions? All of this data has really just not been available before. And all of this is available in Alabama's customized dashboard at the link here. So if anyone wants to dig deeper and play around in the data, you can see the dashboard. You can also download a spreadsheet that has all of the data I'm presenting today and more. The data that we collected is from a 3-year time period, 2015 to 2018. So it is before the pandemic. It does include all test takers. Many states allow anybody to take a licensure test, whether they're actually training to become a teacher or not. And so there will be some people in this data who are actually not in a program to become a teacher. For Alabama, there's about 4,200 test takers across these 3 years. So it's a pretty large number of aspiring teachers. So the first way that we look at the data is going to be most familiar to those people who have looked at pass rate data before. It's after 1 or more attempts, how many people pass this licensure test? In Alabama, 85% of people ultimately pass. It's pretty high pass rate. You can see, though, there's quite a bit of variation. Some institutions where everybody who takes the test passes after 1 or more attempts, versus some institutions where fewer than half of test takers are passing. So this is a pretty wide gap. There's a lot of variation between institutions, and this variation is actually larger than what we see nationwide. Nationally, we tend to see about a 44 percentage point gap between the lowest and highest institutions, and it's a broader range than that for Alabama. The next way we look at the data is going to be much less familiar to people. Very few states make this publicly available, and this is the first time pass rate. That means the first time somebody sits down to take this test, do they pass it or not? And we think looking at first time pass rates is really important for a few reasons. First, it's a signal as to whether people are prepared before they take this test and the content they'll need to know. Second, every time somebody takes this test, it costs them time, it costs them money, it delays their ability to earn a teaching license. And so if you're having very few people who are successful on their first attempt, that can raise a red flag. In Alabama, 53% of test takers pass on their first attempt, which is a little bit higher than the national average on this test. But again, you can see there's a tremendous range from one institution where 80% of test takers pass on their first attempt to one where only 11% of test takers pass on their first attempt. I do want to actually toggle over to my other screen for a moment to show you that load. I'll go back to this. So in the dashboard, if you're interested, you can actually hover to these bars to see what the institution is and how many there are. And again, you see tremendous range here. This is a much broader range than what we see nationally, where there's usually about a 56 percentage point gap between the lowest and highest performing institutions. So in Alabama, we're seeing quite a range in how well test takers are doing depending on their institutions. It's also really important to look at pass rates for test takers of color. Many states and many school districts are putting a big focus on bringing more teachers of color into the workforce. The research is quite clear about the importance of having teachers of color, especially at the elementary grades. But licensure tests traditionally have been a barrier for test takers of color. People of color tend to earn lower pass rates on these exams, which we think largely stems from broader inequities in their educational experiences. And we see that borne out here, but there's, again, quite a large range. And here you can see that there are several institutions here on the far right where pass rates for their test takers of color actually exceed the state average for first-time rates for all test takers in the state. In other words, not only are their test takers doing well, they're doing better than the state average. So these are the University of Alabama, Birmingham Southern College, and Auburn University. So in our dashboard, we highlight those three institutions for being standouts for supporting test takers of color. And those institutions where their test takers tend to struggle more may want to see if there's, some guidance or best practices that they can glean from those standout institutions. The next way we look at the data is something called a walkaway rate. So for states that are really concerned about their supply of elementary teachers, this is a really important statistic. We were able to gather not only pass rates, but also how many times people are taking this test. And from that, we could figure out what proportion of people take the test once, fail it, and don't take the test again. This is actually based on the English and Language Arts subtest, which was the most challenging subtest for this state. And based on that, we see that 23% of test takers who fail on their first attempt don't retake the test in this 3-year window. That's just a tiny bit higher than the national average of 22%. And for test takers of color, that rises to a third of test takers of color who fail the first time they take the test, they don't retake it. So again, when we're thinking about first-time pass rates, it's another reason that it's so important to help people be successful on their first attempts, because you're losing a fifth to a third of your test takers if they struggle on their first attempt. And again, we see wide variation among institutions, from some institutions where nobody walks away after their first attempt to some where 79% of people who fail don't retake it. I do want to note, I mentioned that we looked at the reading and language arts subtest. Alabama is actually one of the few states where that was the subtest with the lowest first-time pass rates. So I think that is unusual. For most states that use this test, or even any other test, social studies tends to be the most challenging subtest, followed by science. So I don't have any answers for why that is for Alabama, but I do think that is worth noting. And we'll actually be releasing a brief in a few weeks looking at pass rate scores among states, if anyone wants to take a closer look into that issue. As we were presenting this data and holding focus groups with leaders of state education agencies and leaders of teacher preparation programs, we would hear quite often that some preparation programs felt like their candidates just couldn't do as well because they were not in selective institutions. Either their institution had open enrollment, or they brought in a lot of people from community colleges, and they just felt like admissions selectivity is such a driving factor for pass rates that they were just kind of not able to overcome that hurdle. And so one of the ways that we looked at the data was sorting pass rates by selectivity of the institution and of the preparation programs. And what we found is, yes, more selective institutions tend to have higher pass rates, But there were quite a few institutions where that wasn't the case. We were able to identify over 100 institutions across the 40 states in our sample where less selective institutions have above average first-time pass rates. Unfortunately, that was Alabama. Unlike about 30 other states, Alabama did not have any institutions with lower selectivity and above average pass rates, although one of these institutions came very close. Although we also looked at socioeconomic status of institutions as measured by the proportion of Pell Grant recipients. And we found that several institutions with more Pell Grant recipients did have above average pass rates, University of Montevallo and University of North Alabama. So I think it's always important to identify those institutions that are kind of breaking trends and supporting test takers of color to see what they're doing and what could be replicated more broadly. So I think there's a few big opportunities here. Alabama already has a generally strong licensure test system. The state is using a strong test, is requiring it for all test takers. The cut scores are nearly on par with what's recommended, and the state has been moving in the right direction on that. So I think the biggest opportunities here are actually to make it easier to learn from this data, to be able to dig deeper into the data, to figure out where aspiring teachers are succeeding, where they're facing challenges, and what promising practices can be replicated to support them. So first, many states have limited data systems, and I think there's a big opportunity for Alabama to build out its data system to support more concrete, more detailed data. And then to actually take the step of publishing this data. As I mentioned, very few states currently publish licensure test pass rate data beyond what's required by the federal government. And making the data more publicly available means that more people are going to look at it. While NCTQ is happy to keep publishing this data, we know that people will have more buy-in, will take it more seriously if it's coming from within the state rather than from an external group like ourselves. And finally, we would love to get preparation programs to be looking at this data. We think that there's a huge amount that they can learn. As I've had with preparation programs, they've had interesting questions. They've had ways that they've wanted to go back and look at their own programs, talk to their peer programs, dig into the data more. So making sure that programs have this data on hand, even though they all should have access to it, many don't have the technical capacity at this point to look at it. We think this is a really powerful tool for improvement. So here is my email address. I would be happy to take any follow-up questions. If anyone wants to discuss this further, I am open. And as I mentioned, our dashboard is publicly available. All of the data is available for download. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share this with you today.
Well, thank you, Hannah. That was an excellent presentation. We appreciate all that you're doing to support high quality preparation programs and supporting and professional learning for our educators. We certainly, we want to be at the top of the list in the country. We've got a ways to go, but we appreciate your information to share with us this morning. Now, next is Mr. Wilson Finch of the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning. Mr. Finch, take it away.
Thank you, everyone, for allowing me a brief time to talk about a new and exciting opportunity that we have working with Alabama, with some support from the National Governors Association. As Tim mentioned, I'm Wilson Finch. I'm the Vice President of Initiatives at the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, more often known as CALE. And, we're here to talk a little bit about a pilot program that we're going to be doing around industry to credit crosswalks that are associated with credit for prior learning in the coming months. CALE, if you don't know, is a national nonprofit that's been around for just over 40 years, associated with supporting adult learners. And so our work is really focused on putting the adult learner sort of at the center of all the work that we do. We're particularly well known for the work that we've done in higher education, especially around credit for prior learning, which I'll talk about in just a moment. around best practices, a lot of research and other sort of outcomes that we've done related to credit for prior learning throughout our entire history. But we also collaborate with workforce and economic development groups, employers, industry groups, foundations, other sort of organizations to really try to support adult learners wherever they are, whether that's entering higher education, if it's going into higher education, but also going into the workforce, finding jobs that are well paid and have long-term survivability regardless of sort of economic situations that may come. And as we look at sort of the work that we're going to be doing in Alabama in particular, we're going to be working on what we call industry to credit crosswalks, which is a type of credit for prior learning. Credit for prior learning is a tool to support adult learners that's been around for 60, 70 years. And Cale has been working around credit for prior learning for the last 40 to 50 years. Many of you may be familiar with a certain type of credit for prior learning, even if the term does not sound familiar to you. Sometimes it's referred to as prior learning assessment, recognition of prior learning, experiential learning, or lifelong learning. But essentially what it is that it is any sort of, you take any sort of knowledge that an individual has, regardless of the source. It could be from work experience, it could be from military experience, it could be from volunteer experience, it could be just from having read books, any sort of knowledge. Really the source of the knowledge does not matter. And having that knowledge demonstrated to the satisfaction of subject matter experts to be awarded for credit at a institution of post-secondary higher education. And so sort of the key components there has to be at the sort of post-secondary higher education level. So it has to be something that can be equated to credit. We all have experiences that we've learned throughout our lifetime that may be of use to ourselves, but whether or not it equates to a college course is sort of an open question. But that's sort of what the level that we're trying to achieve. The student has to be able to demonstrate that knowledge. So just because they have it doesn't necessarily mean it's sufficient. We do not support the awarding of credit simply for someone having been in a job for a certain number of years or seat time or anything like that. Really, it has to be the demonstration of knowledge itself rather than experience. And it has to be done to the satisfaction of a subject matter expert. That is typically a faculty member with expertise in that subject. So it is the faculty members who make that final determination about whether or not to award credit or not. But once those sort of qualifiers are sort of satisfied, credit for prior learning can be used in a variety of ways to support adult learners. And when we talk about adult learners, typically at Cale, we're talking about those who are 25 and older, who make up an increasing role in higher education. They typically at this point make up over a third, close approaching 40% of higher education across the country. But also credit for prior learning can be useful to those who fall outside of that, especially military members who may be over the age of 18, but under the age of 25 as well. But particularly, we find that those qualifiers include a lot of adults as well.
Wilson, may I jump in here? For some reason, your speaker notes are blocking your slides.
Oh, whoops.
On my screen. So I don't know what. There you go. That's right. That's good. Sorry about that.
There you go. No worries. Let me move that out of the way. Sorry about that. And so credit for prior learning really has a lot of benefits. If you're particularly interested, in 2020, we produced a report, a large longitudinal study called the PLA Boost. The link is down on our website, but you can also simply Google PLA Boost and you should find it. That has a lot of the outcomes associated with credit for prior learning. In general, again, the report goes into more detail. We find that individuals who have undertaken credit for prior learning have higher GPAs, they have shorter times to degree, better retention rates and completion rates, and they take more courses at their institution, which is very important for the institution. So even though credit for prior learning may mean that individuals who take this particular pathway may not need to take courses. When we talk about credit for prior learning, we are talking about being able to test out or to take some sort of assessment, so they do not need to take courses that they already have knowledge in. But when they do that, then the nice thing about that is that they have more they take more courses at the institution because they are retained at higher rates. And so they tend to take about 17 credits on average more at the institution in which they are enrolled compared to their non-credit for prior learning peers. So lots of very beneficial outcomes around credit for prior learning, not only for the student involved, helping them to get through their their program more successfully and more quickly, but also helping them to stay at the institution longer, which also helps the bottom line of the institution and increases the amount of time that the individual spends with faculty members and at the institution and getting more of that sort of college experience and getting more out of it. And so when we talk about credit for prior learning or prior learning assessment, these sort of typical categories, many of you may be familiar with the first one, which are standardized exams, CLEP examinations being the most common. We also have DSST exams that are also known as Dante's, which are traditionally were provided to members of the military, but are also now open to members of the civilian population. Institutional challenge exams, also known as proficiency exams or departmental exams, portfolio assessments, ACE military recommendations, and the ACE non-military recommendations that are also provided as well. Those are typically the most common ones. Also, advanced placement and international baccalaureate could also be considered a type of credit for prior learning. We don't typically focus on them as much because they don't really target the adult population. But technically speaking, you are taking learning that is earned outside of the college classroom and evaluating it for college credit. It just happens to be in a more formalized sort of fashion. But lastly, the most important category I want to really address today is that which I started off with, which are industry to credit crosswalks. And these are sort of an institutional review of training that may exist outside of the classroom, whether it's certifications, licensures, apprenticeships, non-credit courses, corporate training, et cetera, that is evaluated for college credit. And so when we talk about sort of these types of crosswalks, what do I mean by that? At the end of the day, really a crosswalk is simply a list on which trainings are on one side, wherever the source is of those trainings, whether it's an industry certification or it's a local businesses training, or it's a licensure or apprenticeship. And then on the other side are college courses for which credit is being awarded for successfully completing those trainings. And so obviously, a lot has to go in to produce those lists to make that determination of whether or not the training on one side, the certification, the licensure, the training, et cetera, is worth the credit for the courses on the other. And so what happens is that subject matter experts will dive into the deep course learning outcomes, the training learning outcomes that exist for providing those certifications and trainings, and determine, do they match sufficiently the course learning outcomes on the other side at the individual institution to determine whether or not there should be credit awarded. And so because of this process, it actually has a lot of benefits. One of the nicest things about credit for prior learning crosswalks are that they're very fast for students. What we have, because all the work is being pre-assessed, the assessments are taking place ahead of time. Students no longer have to take an examination to prove that they know the knowledge. If they successfully complete the training, and they provide that documentation to the institution saying, here's my certificate, here's my training information, that is sufficient to award credit automatically at the institution. So it happens immediately. All the student has to do is turn in the documentation, says, I did this, I'm done. And that means the institution can very quickly make that determination because they have a list. They say it matches this course. They put it immediately on the student's transcript. It's also very fast for the institution because they don't have to reassess every single student who comes through the door. They're assessing the training that the student does. And so because they do that, they do it once, and then they don't have to do it again unless the curriculum changes. And so in that case, it's sort of maintained much more easily. It's a lower lift for institutions to do. They have faculty members do the assessments up front, then they don't have to check them again until the curriculum changes, or there needs to be a regular sort of review to make sure that the curriculum continues to match what they have. But otherwise, they're not doing it on an every single case basis, which they have to do for challenge exams and portfolio assessments. And so in that sense, it's very quick, it's very fast. It's also very easy to maintain. It has a lower expense and lower overhead associated with it. Most of the operations that take place beyond the first initial assessment are done in a registrar's office. So it can be done in sort of a back office sort of calculation, put immediately into a student's transcript. You get the benefits of credit for prior learning much more quickly. You can some institutions even do that as a pre-enrollment activity. So they can tell students, if you enroll at our institution, you will automatically get credit for these particular certifications and trainings before the student even shows up, which is a very good retention and attracting sort of new students to say, actually you're a lot closer to getting a degree than you thought you were, because you can get credit in these particular areas. And so it's very useful in that sense. And then also, I would also just sort of add that these are very sort of high quality responses. There's a lot of people who are getting industry certifications out there, a lot of people who are getting on the job trainings and corporate trainings and other types of activities. So there's a lot of high volume that can go through these particular ones. So the cost sort of benefit analysis is very high. You can get a lot of students who go through this. It doesn't cost institutions to do this very much. It's great for like grant programs and things like that, where you can build up, you have initial capacity building sort of source of revenue to have these assessments done. And then you sort of set them up, and then you don't have to worry about them long term. And so for many institutions, that pays off very well for the work that they're hoping to do. And so in terms of what we're going to be doing in this particular project, Credit for Prior Learning, the crosswalks will be supported by the National Governors Association. And so over the next few months, we'll be taking 3 trainings that have been selected from the state's EPTL, that's the eligible training provider list, to crosswalk to one institution. We've done this before at Cale. Obviously, if you have workforce boards that are supporting particular trainings, it's a great idea to have those crosswalk to courses at your public institutions, because on the one hand, you have your workforce system already paying for these trainings and a lot of people going through them. And then on the other side, you have public institutions that are trying to increase their enrollment. And so why not connect the two systems together? Why not evaluate the training that's on one side of the eligible training provider list and then send those students and say, once you complete this training, the workforce board is already supporting to get you employed. Why not have the added benefit of saying, also, if you want to continue learning and build on what you've just done, you can go to your local institution and have this equated for college level credit. We'll be creating a model so this can be replicated at later stages at scale across the state. The idea there that once it's sort of up and going, institutions will be able to build upon that sort of model. We'll also be, of course, making sure to align to important guidelines such as SACS, which is the regional accrediting body, the Alabama occupational and competency framework models that exist, and also looking at best practices for credit for prior learning data collection models, all to feed into this so that there's a unique model specific to Alabama that can be utilized across the state in many circumstances. And then, of course, we'll be providing a report of the findings of the pilot program as a whole. And so that's what we'll be doing. We'll sort of be testing this out, showing it as a proof of concept, and really talking about the various benefits and outcomes that we have in sort of pitfalls, lessons learned, all that sort of good stuff, and trying to make this work at the test site. So that is all I have. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Wilson, for the presentation this morning. I really look forward to seeing the results of your collaboration with the GOAT on prior learning assessment and competency-based learning. So thank you again for your presentation. And now up we have Josh Laney and Mike Malley and Stephanie Paul to talk to us about our apprenticeship dashboard. Josh?
Good morning, everybody. I apologize. I'm calling in from my mobile office, so you've got my camera right up in my big face. We're just here to talk this morning about a new tool that's being developed for tracking apprenticeships and in-demand occupations in the state. Everybody knows we took over managing registered apprenticeships in the state August of 2019, and one of the biggest challenges we have faced is a lack of clear data that we could share with our constituents, and people have a hard time locating apprenticeships and identifying the connections between apprenticeships and in-demand occupations. And ultimately, if you don't know where you are, you can't get where you're going. And so we have worked closely over, I guess, really almost that entire time, that 2-year period, with University of Alabama Education Policy Center. Mike Malley and Stephanie Paul are both absolute geniuses at what they do, and they have developed a really, really cool tool that is going to be, they'll demo it for you. It's available now live on our website at alapprentice.org. We don't have time to go through all of the things that it can do this morning, but I would just encourage you all to check out the features that Mike and Stephanie are going to share with you, and then also go to the website, play around with it, and let us know if there are other things you wish it could do or questions you wish it would answer for you, because we're in what I would say is the second iteration of a beta version here. It's functional, but they're still working on it. We're still growing it. So without further ado, I'll turn it over. Mike, you guys demo this really cool thing you built there.
Great. Thanks, Josh. I am going to try to keep it very simple. And so I'm going to run through the 4 major components that it includes on these slides. And then I am going to jump on over to the front end and just walk you through what we've just talked about. And so we'll go over the dashboard. We'll look at the first component, which is this interactive apprenticeship map. We'll learn how to search registered apprenticeship programs, find nationally recognized apprenticeable occupations, and then explore in-demand occupations. The purpose of the dashboard is simple. It is to link apprenticeship information to in-demand and employment information, and then provide useful up-to-date information for anyone interested in exploring apprenticeship opportunities in Alabama. The interactive map displays the location of all the registered programs with active apprenticeship occupations associated with them. It includes information about the program sponsor contact, such as the name, email, phone number, as well as the sample or trained occupations. The second major component is this ability to search registered apprenticeships. And so with this, users can explore any one of the registered apprenticeships that have been authorized or registered by the Alabama Office of Apprenticeship. And then there's a bunch of search filters which they can use to hone their search. Additionally, and this one is focused on the needs of employers, users can find nationally recognized apprenticeship occupations. And so for an employer looking to discover, which apprenticeship or which occupations they can apprentice, this is a way for them to do that. And then finally, there was a need to connect this information with the in-demand occupations so that we could target and build registered apprenticeships around the ACCCP's in-demand occupations list. And so we've connected that information and made it accessible through a summary and regional view, which we'll jump into in just a second. In development right now are some advanced user tutorials so that in addition to the user documentation that can be found on the dashboard, users can just jump into, video tutorials, which will help them utilize the app. We're also looking at expanding on the automated reports so that in addition to the downloading data and the graphics that you can find on the dashboard, users will be able to, for instance, print a regional report that shows, all of the apprenticeship occupations, as well as which of them are in demand, et cetera. And then user analytics so that Josh's group, the Alabama Office of Apprenticeship, can track the number of hits on the website, as well as just the general usability. What are people focusing on and where are the bottlenecks? And then we just have some general design and performance improvements that are in the works right now as well. Of course, you can find this on the website, and we will jump over to it right now. So when you hit the dashboard, this is the first of the 4 tools that we had just discussed. This is the interactive apprenticeship map, and you can, zoom in this way or utilize this side button. And then when you hover it, you can, view this apprenticeship information, the sample occupations, as well as the sponsor contact and stuff like that. You can also, drill into any of these different aspects and then hit the home button to just restore your view. Of course, you can hover over this stuff to get some more information. And then all of the tools are built around this, this top header here. And so you have your interactive map, registered programs, apprenticeable occupations, and this demand occupations tool will go through them in order. So this registered apprenticeship tab makes accessible all of those registered apprenticeships by the AOA. And they are displayed here in this table. You can click this table and view the accompanying information here on the right-hand side. You can look at the occupations trained or, view this apprenticeship on the map. And so this changes as you click through. And then, of course, you can hone your selection. And so for the ACCCP or other state agencies looking to build, to build or network around these career clusters, they can very simply come in here and search this way. And then you always see the results here at the bottom. And then upon clicking it, this is just also the trained occupations. And so you have these additional filters. You can sort only for the in-demand. If I restore this here, I can tell you that there are 110 in-demand occupations with associated registered apprenticeships. We'll move on to the apprenticeable occupations. And this again is just makes accessible the U.S. Department of Labor's list of nationally recognized apprenticeship occupations. And again, we've linked that information with, the state demand list. So of the 1,200 that are in the original view, you can see that, 570 of those correspond with any one of the state's in-demand occupations. Again, you can search by career cluster or training type if you would like to drill into the competency-based or hybrid. And then, of course, the keyword search, which allows you to search by Rapids code or title or ONET. Now you can see how that works there. And then finally, and perhaps most important to this group, is the in-demand occupations explorer. And so this was built primarily, first and foremost for the Alabama Office of Apprenticeship to understand which apprenticeable occupations were also in demand, but it is a benefit to the larger ACCCP in general or other workforce agencies and just making that list available. And so again, you can sort by education level, career cluster, STEM occupations only if you would like. And again, then we can come back here and say we only want state in demand, apprenticeable in-demand occupations on the state list. You can see that these line up here, and you can see which regions that it is in demand. You can also click any one of these and see this accompanying information in terms of the work keys, the program occupations, as well as the related ONET information. And then you can also come down here and compare regionally any one of the selected occupations. And so now we are looking at this training and development specialists, and we can compare the statistics across the 7 workforce regions and statewide. And so we see that it is in demand in all of the regions except 2 and 6. And here is the corresponding information. You can also jump directly into a regional search if you would like. And so you can see that 104 occupations are in demand in region 1, and you can explore this way. And so we have it by a you can search in demand occupations either by a master list, which is sorted by title, or you can jump into a regional view over here. And then of course, on every one of these tabs, we have this video tutorial, which you can use and will be updated soon. And that is about it. I will jump back real quick to show you what I had missed on this apprenticeable occupations, which is that you can select any one of these and jump into all of the linked information. And so this combines information from Career One Stop and ONET so that the AOA and other agencies don't have to go anywhere beyond this tool to jump into and find the information they need to build competency-based programs or linked to similar occupations. And that is about it. Of course, the Alabama Office of Apprenticeship is available to anyone who has any questions or would like to explore this further, as are Stephanie and I at the University of Alabama.
Thank you, Mike. That tool is extremely helpful for me and my staff. We've also demonstrated it to all of the, we've gone around to each of the regions and met with the Career Center staff, the business service reps, and we've also met with the Alabama Department of rehabilitative services, their business representatives. Those are the kind of customers that we anticipate using this most and first. But the idea is pretty clear. There's a lot of information between what we're working on just specifically in apprenticeship and then what the what the GOAT is working on, and Tanya and all of her work for the ACCCP and all the tax. This tool brings it together visually in a way that can be accessed, and you can see the linkages between them. So we're very proud of it. We hope you like it, and let us know if there's something else that we can make it do for you. I say that Mike can make it do for you, but let us know. So that's what we got, Mr. McCartney.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate the presentation, and really look forward to seeing more of that and getting that disseminated across the state. So great work, guys. Next, we have Dr. Hill with Girls Inc. Dr. Hill, we're running a little bit past time, but that's the good thing about having a webinar is we can run over as much time as we want. So don't feel hurried. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I will be brief, but thank you so much for letting me come today and talk about a new project that Girls Inc. of Central Alabama is honored to be part of. It's called Project Accelerate, and it's really about creating more workplace equity and getting more young women, particularly young women of color, into the pipeline for jobs. Just for those of you who don't know a lot about Girls Inc., we're part of a national organization that's been around for a long time, since the 1860s. And here in Central Alabama, we've been here since 1938. We are part of the United Way family of agencies. And for those of you in other parts of the state, there are 3 Girls Inc.'s in Alabama. There's one in Dothan and one in Huntsville. And we serve Central Alabama, so that's the Birmingham MSA. Girls Inc. traditionally serves young girls ages 6 to 18, so the school years. And we try to target girls and young women who are in underserved locations and are in communities and schools that are under-resourced. Our mission is to inspire all girls to be strong, smart, and bold. And what that looks like is health and wellness programming, sports, art, reading, literacy, a lot of STEM. We do a lot of science and math programming. And then all of the kind of prevention and life skills programs that you would think, everything from anti-bullying to child abuse prevention to preventing adolescent pregnancy. Those are all part of Girls Inc.'s mission. And we do those programs not only at our Crestwood location in Birmingham or at our summer camps throughout Central Alabama, but also in area schools. Before the pandemic, we were in about 50 area schools, and we hope, of course, as we all do, to return to that level. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is a project that our national organization proposed to something called the Equality Can't Wait Challenge. The challenge was to increase the number of women, and particularly women of color, in positions of power. And it was funded by Pivotal Ventures and the Schusterman Foundation to really address one of 4 key issues: economic participation and opportunity, what we're talking about here today, political empowerment, health and survival, and educational attainment. Girls Inc., our national organization, was thrilled to be one of 4 $10 million awards through this challenge. And because I was part of working on the development of this program, Girls Inc. of Central Alabama will be one of 7 pilot sites that include New York City, Philadelphia, Orange County, California, and yes, Birmingham, Alabama. So what are we going to do? Well, Project Accelerate is about increasing the speed in which young women can become leaders in the workplace. And it is about both helping corporations be ready for them and about ensuring that the young women have both the education and the skill development they need to be part of the leadership track in companies. So what are we doing for young women? Well, We know that Girls Inc. is great at getting young women into college, but our work typically has stopped there. So in Project Accelerate, we'll continue to work with young women through their college years into their early career years as support, making sure that they finish not just their first year of college, but that they graduate. We will also connect them with paid internships in their fields so that these young women don't have to experience the kind of workplace they want to be in once they finish their education. They'll be part of internships during their college years. We will connect them with mentors, coaches, sponsors, all of those buzzwords you've heard, basically people who have been there and done that, who will help them reach their potential more quickly. I think those of us who've been in the workplace for a long time have learned a lot of lessons. There's no reason that we can't save younger women the time so that they can skip all of those lessons. They will receive the resources they need to pursue both their career and any other kind of education that they need, or credentials that they need to take that career on. And then we hope to place them in jobs where they will succeed. What are we going to do and how are we going to do that? We'll use a case management approach. It's been very successful in some other communities, and we are now going to pilot it through these 7 networks. So the young women will have somebody to call when they're not sure what to do. We'll connect them to internships. We will recruit mentors and make sure that they are trained, and these will be mentors in their chosen field. We will conduct college and career readiness workshops, introduce them to new industries and careers. I'm an Alabama native, and I'm fond of saying that I have a job I did not know existed growing up in Jackson County. So we'll make sure that young women know about all the jobs that are available to them. I just want to shout out this photo. These are some of the young women who were in our STEM camp this summer. They're in middle and early high school, and they were at Birmingham Southern this summer doing all the things we're talking about, and we're going to be able to follow these young women through their college years. So that's very exciting to us. If you want to know more, if you want to get involved, if you'd like to be a mentor or host an intern, or help us match the funds that we'll be getting from our national organization, here's how you can reach me. I hope you'll reach out. This is a really exciting thing, and it's great for Alabama to get to be one of the sites. So thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hill. That was very informative. I love your email address, Chill. That's cool.
It's easy to remember.
It is. It is. Well, thank you so much. We look forward to hearing more from you and the program and your successes. Congratulations on the grant. That's terrific. So we are running a little bit past. Well, actually, I think Nick's going to be able to get us back on track. Nick Moore with the Governor's Office of Education and Workforce Transformation. Give us an update on the workforce in Alabama as far as the numbers go, Nick.
All right. Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. So this month, I'm going to share with you a survey that we conducted with Signal. And this survey was similar to a survey we did in May. And what it's looking at is employer talent dynamics. And what I mean by employer talent dynamics is hiring preferences, human capital development and training practices, and then challenges related to hiring and employee retention. And we particularly got into things like skills-based hiring and competency-based learning. What was clear is that a lot of employers are going to be adding new jobs in the next 6 months, but they're also having some challenges in finding employees. So the 2 biggest causes for that were lack of applicants generally, 25%, and candidates did not have the skills the job required at 35%. So when we looked a little bit deeper, what we saw is, compared to May, there were a lot more employers saying, compared to May, 48% compared to 37%, that they were definitely going to be hiring people. Another thing that was interesting and very positive is that preferences around skills-based hiring have increased from 39 to 45%. We're going to continue marketing and promoting skills-based hiring, and particularly when our skills-based job description generator gets out, we'll be making the case for how that can save time and money for employers and can really expand opportunity for diverse learners, adult learners, in the COVID-19 recovery and beyond. Large companies are more likely to use skills-based hiring and competency-based statements and job descriptions. That's relatively intuitive because they're more likely to have established HR managers and larger HR operations, whereas a sole proprietor may be developing those job descriptions at the same time they're running a forklift or something. 75% of respondents who are not currently using skill and competency-based job descriptions are interested, and that's a 12% increase from May, and that is becoming clear that the message around saving time and money is beginning to become of interest. And it's certainly not just our promotion of this. This is something that's catching on nationally, and there's a lot of people discussing this. So taking a look at business engagement with regional workforce councils, we did see that there was more information being shared about connections to regional workforce councils, and that there were more connections happening on a more regular basis. So we were pleased to see that. So when we're talking about education and training provider relationships with the education system, 31% are very certain and 39% are somewhat certain that the education and training providers in their area are properly preparing potential employers for their open positions. That's something that's not positive. That's something that we want to increase. And some of that is likely due just to information asymmetry. There's a lot of good training providers out there doing good work. We just got to make sure that they're all matched up with employers and that there's not 3 or 4 layers of middle people between them. We need employers working directly with the training providers and the employer giving the recipe for that in-demand job and the training provider responding to it, not cooking up a program that then they're trying to sell to the employer. 30% and 42% believe that the career and technical programs are aligned with the needs of their company. And again, that's something that we're just going to have to work on. We know that anecdotally just from talking around with folks, but to see it through in a statistically valid survey is another thing. So we definitely got to work on that. Some good news is the Ready to Work program. More than half of the folks responding here are very familiar, somewhat familiar with Ready to Work, and that's a 6% increase since May. The people that are most likely to job applicants that are interested in Ready to Work would be respondents without a college degree, and that's kind of obvious. Low income earners, rural respondents, and respondents to organizations with fewer than 100 employees. And that is very interesting because here to date, Ready to Work has been with some of the larger employers. So that's what we had from this particular survey, Mr. Chairman. I think that the most significant pieces of this were around the interest in skills-based hiring, competency-based learning, and also the fact that our employers are just not confident that our education and training programs and various state-funded enterprises are aligned with their needs. And so we all know that we want that to happen. And so certainly committed to making that happen over the course of this year and beyond.
Thanks, Nick. Great information. There's some good information on that survey. As we all know on this call, there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, and all of our schools and all of our government agencies are working hard to improve our workforce. So it's good though to check it out every so often with the survey like this to let us know exactly where the folks in the state think we are versus where the rest of us think we are. So we've got to close that gap. So this just keeps us on our toes. So I want to thank everyone again today for joining us, all the speakers, great information. And for those of you watching either live now or if you're watching the recorded tape later, just remember you can go back and there's contact information for all of our speakers within the session here. So feel free to reach out to them with any questions you may have. I also invite you to join us again on November 15th, 2021 at 9 a.m. for our next webinar. And thanks, I want to thank all of our folks that make this possible at AlabamaWorks and AIDT. Sonia has been very faithful in keeping us in track and on the air.